This edition of Q&A with the Coach is sponsored by NoGiBJJGear.com. Go check them out. Use my code Ramsey10 for a 10% discount off everything at NoGiBJJGear.com. On with the questions. Our next question comes from Logan, who says, "Hey Ramsey, if I'm allowed to call you that, what else would you call me? Bill? Bob? Buck? No. My name is Ramsey. That's the name I prefer." So, Logan says, "What do you think of the old school boxing stance from when grappling was allowed? Do you think it would be usable in MMA?" Now, generally, if people are talking about old-timey boxing stances, they're usually talking about the English boxing stance, which is the one that we usually see portrayed in old pictures where the fighters have their hands up in this fashion. It was a popular pose in the posters and the drawings back then and in the photographs. But what that was, it was called the English boxing stance. It was a defensive counter-punching stance with most of the weight on the back foot, about 30% of the weight on the front foot, and the hands raised, extended from the body. Now, you ask, is that a viable stance for mixed martial arts? All right, flip those hands around. What do we have? With about 70% of the weight on the back leg and about 30 on the front, and the hands out in front in this fashion, okay? One closer to the body, and then one in front. What is that? It's a Muay Thai stance. It's exactly the same as a Muay Thai stance, which is a counter-striking stance. It is a defensive striking stance. Now, when you said back when grappling was still allowed, back in the early 1900s, the rules of boxing were different. Now, the fighters didn't wrestle, they didn't go for submissions or takedowns or anything like that, but the fighters, the boxers, were allowed to clinch for an extended period of time. The referee would separate it if he felt like it was going on for too long or if nothing was happening, but if both guys were working inside of a clinch, dirty boxing, it wasn't dirty back then, it was just called boxing. Dirty boxing is when you hold the other guy and hit him. So, that English boxing stance, or that defensive stance with those hands out in front, what are those? Those are feelers. Those are antennae. So when the other guy comes in and makes contact with you, boom, they turn into grips right away. This turns into a bicep grip. This turns into a collar tie, right? And then we can start moving the guy around, blocking those punches from the arms, blocking those punches from the head, using our elbow as a lever, and so on. Does that happen in MMA? Yeah, constantly. Now, a couple other things to note. Fighters from 100 years ago, 120 years ago, 150 years ago didn't exclusively use the English boxing stance. There were a lot of different stances employed back then. That was one of them. And you might also notice that fighters would transition from one stance to another. Every good fighter does that. They don't just camp out in the same static position throughout the entire fight. That would be ridiculous. That would be stupid. Why? Because fighting is dynamic. As soon as the position changes, your stance has to change. As soon as the situation changes, your stance has to change accordingly. And so a good MMA fighter is going to change his stance constantly and dynamically throughout the fight, depending on the situation. So, if you are thinking, would it be okay to go out in an MMA fight in the old English boxing stance and just camp out like that the whole time? No, because if you do that, as soon as your opponent becomes savvy to the fact that you will not change your position, he will shoot for your legs and put you on the floor. Now, are there moments in MMA fights where you can and should do that position? Yes. Yes, constantly. Anytime you see a fighter use a Muay Thai stance, a Muay Thai position, that defensive counter-striking position, yes, that is what it is. That is the English boxing stance. Add kicks and outward palms, Muay Thai stance, exactly the same thing. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.